Good Sunday morning. We have, as I had said last week, we have a very interesting guest today. And I actually went to Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, I think it was a little over a week ago. And it was really an exciting meeting. There was a lot of people there. And I'll just put some things on the screen here. This, for anybody that doesn't know, it's called Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. And it's basically a bunch of people who are getting together in the celebrity as well as just the world of interest of what's going on with all this various craft and paranormal phenomena that we see with this. When I was sitting there, I saw this gentleman, and we said hi, and I didn't know what he was doing. Next thing I know, he grabs a microphone and he's up giving probably one of the most detailed presentations I've seen ever on ufology, UAPs, whatever you want to call them. And my guest today is Micheal Schratt, and he's a private pilot. He also does aviation history research, or historian, and he's been investigating UFOs for probably 25 plus years. And really, I was so impressed with not only his presentation, but his graphics. You'll see here, he's going to put a lot of stuff on the screen about, the different recreations that he's done from eyewitness accounts and probably some of his own experiences as well. And he and I were talking before the show about some of my experiences, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So without further ado, I'm going to bring him in. And by the way, I should also say Mike has also been on Coast to Coast. He's been on Fade to Black, UFO Hunters, History Channel, Paranormal Matrix, all kinds of great stuff. In fact, I think I saw him speak at Contact in the Desert here not too long ago. So I'm going to bring him in. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Good to be with you. Thank you. Great.
So
excellent.
Yeah. So you and I were talking before, and we both have had a few experiences, haven't we? And I love how you've researched this whole element in so many different ways. And so I'm going to kind of let you share the screen here.
Okay.
And I also want to just tell the audience, and we'll show this later, this is Michael's book. It's called Dark Files. And he used a lot of the graphics from this presentation, which was, I thought, amazing. And if anybody wants to get a hold of this, he'll tell you where you can buy it. And I'm sure he'll put up his website and such. But excellent book. I've got it right here, actually. I've been reading it while we were waiting for the show to start. So without further ado, I'm going to let you take it away, Mike, and tell us what you're doing and what you're researching on.
Okay. So hopefully this shows up. Looks like it's good. So basically, the primary focus of my research is classified aircraft within the military-industrial complex. Now, that eventually bled over to the historical UFO cases, and I'd say right around 2010 timeframe, I spent about 2 years going through the QFOS files, Center for UFO Studies. That's 2457 West Peterson Avenue, downtown Chicago area. At that point, I kind of moved on to the UFO crash retrieval cases from Leonard Stringfield. That's been my crusade the last 4 years, is to get all of his cases illustrated. But what we want to talk about today, what we have up on the screen here, really represents kind of the internal core of the historical UFO cases. So I've picked out one man-made case, which I believe to be man-made, and then one potential UFO actual legacy ET case. So we want to look at those. So I'm going to start right with this one here. And the date is March 23rd, 1966, Temple, Oklahoma. And I should mention that this is not my case. This is an official U.S. Air Force Project Blue Book case. Now, they closed down in 1969, but out of all the Project Blue Book cases, personally, I think this is the most important one for a number of reasons. So I want to set this up. So March 23rd, 1966, Temple, Oklahoma, we have an electrical engineer by the name of Eddie Laxon, who is a perfect witness on this case. He was a CFI. He was a private pilot. He had 5,000 hours total time. He was an aircraft recognition expert. This is the perfect person for this case. So it's about 5:05 in the morning. He's on his daily commute to Shepherd Air Force Base. The sun is just coming up over the horizon, so it was still a little bit dark out. And he's just driving down the road on the morning commute, and all of a sudden, his headlights capture something parked perpendicular to the roadway. So he puts on the brakes, and he's looking at, and I'm going to just lay this out here. This thing was about 75 feet in length, about 9 feet tall. If we start on the right-hand side, there was a bubble transparent canopy that looked like it came from a B-26 from World War II. After that, there were 2 beaming spotlights shining down. Forward beaming spotlights shining forward. The whole craft was propped up off the pavement about 3 feet by what looked like pogo lunar landing gear legs. Now, just aft of the forward landing gear legs, there was an air stair door that was opened up. Aft of that air stair door, there was a man. He said it was a man, not an alien, not an extraterrestrial. This was a human being. He was wearing 2-piece green military fatigues. He had a baseball cap with the bill turned up. He was shining a flashlight down on the air stair doors. Now, immediately above and aft of the air stair door, there was a stinger or spire that swept back toward the trailing edge of the craft that terminated in an 8-inch diameter sphere. Aft of that, of the air stair door, there was a porthole window 3.5 feet in diameter, divided into 4 equal pie segments. Now, immediately aft of the porthole window, written in black letters vertically, were the letters TL4768 written on the side of the craft. At the very end of the craft, there was what looked like flight controls that were way too small to be aerodynamically efficient. Now, when the man wearing the 2-piece green military fatigues noticed he was being watched by Eddie Laxon, he scurried up this door. He slammed the door shut. Then there was a high-pitched drilling noise, according to the Project Blue Book report. The whole craft levitated off the pavement, I'd say about 30 feet, sat there for 30 seconds, and departed like a spark on a grinding wheel and made no sonic boom. And this is back in 1966. In a nutshell, that is this case.
Wow. Yeah. So, it's interesting. You and I were talking before the show, and I was telling you about, I grew up in northern Wisconsin. It was not too far from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Right. And many people may have heard of the city Eagle River. It's where the snowmobile races go on, the World Championship in Minocqua, all of that. So we lived a little bit northwest of Eagle River, a little town called Sainer, right in between St. Germain and Sainer. And I used to map craft in the 70s that were triangular shaped, and they would hover and go down. And, my sense was it wasn't extraterrestrial. And, I kind of want to get your opinion on that. What do you think of that?
Well,
Explain.
We're looking at a multi-headed hydra here. We've got man-made craft. We've got potential extraterrestrial craft. We've got interdimensional craft. We've got extratemporal craft from our future. We've got USOs. So we've got all these things converging at the same time. Then we've got the
What's CIA, a USO?
What's a USO? Unidentified submerged object. 51% of all UFO cases are USO cases. So they have some kind of interest in our oceans, lakes, rivers, reservoirs. There's absolutely an interest in bodies of water with UFOs. So when you take all these things together, and then you factor in the prehistory cases, the cases of a high technological civilization that could be here for thousands of years. So now we're looking at 9 different explanations. We talked a little bit before the show that whatever or whoever these UFOs are, they're tricksters, because they can come and go as they please. They materialize and dematerialize as they please. There seems to be no problem for them going from the air into the ocean and back off into the atmosphere, into space. They have no problem with that. They've been seen to go inside of mountains with no impact. So In a lot of these cases, we're not dealing with metallic craft here. So there could be a spiritual component to this.
Yeah, I even think possibly a demonic component as well at times.
It's very possible. It's very possible. Now, there's been talk from senators and congressmen when they leave these congressional hearings and news reporters come up to them and they ask them, what's the truth about UFOs? And all they would give us is, have you read your Bible lately? Which I thought was interesting, very interesting. Now, I'm going to move on to the next slide here, which kind of gives you a layout here. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, so here's Eddie Laxon's original sketch. And if you look at his dimensions here, he's saying that the craft is 8 feet tall and 75 feet in length. So anyone can figure out that there's something wrong here, right? Because if the total height of the craft is 8 feet and the length is 75 feet, then this drawing is grossly out of scale. The whole thing should be stretched another 60, 70% off to the left. But I can see what he did, right? He was dealing with an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. He couldn't make it to scale. So he just did the best he could. But this is his original sketch. So I spent a day going through the case, looking at the dimensions, came up with what I believe is the correct configuration. And that's what you see here on this drawing. Now, a couple things I want to mention. Eddie Laxon said that he was so close to this man wearing the two-piece green military fatigues, he said that he could recognize him in Oklahoma City that night, that afternoon. He was so close to him. That's how close he could recognize him. Now, he also said that this man with the two-piece green military fatigues, he was wearing what looked like U.S. Naval Admiral chevrons on his shoulder and on the upper part of his arms. So there was, it's screaming a man-made technology. It's absolutely screaming a man-made technology here. Now let's get back to this stinger or spire with a ball at the end of it. Looking at these cases for 25 years, I've got probably, I would say conservatively 30 UFO cases where there's this stinger or a prong or a protrusion that sticks out of the UFO with a ball at the end of it. Something that just keeps on popping up and up and up again. And I'm thinking there's got to be a reason for this. This is not here by chance. There's a reason for every component on these UFOs. So I started looking and I thought, well, let's take a look at high voltage electrical equipment, because in the Project Blue Book case, it said there was a high pitched drilling noise before this thing took off. So I thought, what kind of electrical components would mimic the form, fit, and function of this UFO? And how do we describe these prongs with these spheres at the end of them? Well, if you look at a Wimshurst generator and you look at these electrical components, what you're going to find out is they have something called an electrical discharge sphere. So what I'm proposing is what Eddie Laxon saw was an early prototype which had now progressed to the in-field configuration where they had a discharge sphere at the top of it. This is something that is very consistent with the other cases, because when we hear about UFO cases and we talk about CE2 cases, close encounters of the second kind. So going over J. Allen Hynek's laying everything out. A close encounter of the first kind is a visual sighting. That's a light in the sky. Close encounter of the second kind are physical effects like tree branches breaking, engine car stalling, static on the radio. That's a close encounter of the second kind. Close encounter of the third kind is an interaction or sighting with a being of some kind. But getting back to the CE2 cases, we've got so many cases, and you mentioned this too, with your motorcycle, where we have engine stalling, motorcycle engines conking out. That's an absolute CE2 effect here. And I'm going to move on to the next slide.
Yeah, I just want to interject 1 second here. You and I were talking before where my motorcycle, this is in the mid 70s, totally, we arced the battery and absolutely could not get any current. Next morning started right up. So I
That's
think
right.
you're right
That's right.
about this. I think you're right about
So we could potentially be looking at a CE2 effect here. What you're looking at here is a hand-drawn sketch by Eddie Laxon of where this thing came down. I mean, this guy was a credible witness, could not have gotten a better witness, but he shows the object parked basically perpendicular to the roadway. He shows you how far he was and where he parked his car. So then I went to Google Maps and I thought, let's see if we can, by his original sketch, pinpoint where this all went down. This is a half-mile west of intersection Highway 65 and 70 near Temple, Oklahoma. And I believe what you're looking at here on the screen is the exact location plus or minus 20 feet. This is, if we can go back in time to 1966, at that time, at that place, this is what you'd be looking at. And this craft would be parked right here. This is the index card. I won't read the whole thing, but it just says here, observer spotted object parked on highway in front of his car. Observer stopped car and get out to investigate. But as he got close to the object, a man apparently entered the object and immediately the object began to rise from the ground. And so again, this is an official U.S. Air Force Project Blue Book case. So I didn't want to leave it there. I did some digging here. I looked at the newspaper clippings. So this is Lawton Morning Press, March 24th, 1966. Temple man meets UFO on highway. Here's another one, Wichita Falls Times, March 23rd, 1966. Strange flying object sighted. A couple of quick bullet items regarding Eddie Laxon here. So he was a pilot since 1941, 8,000 hours pilot in command, expert in aircraft recognition. Object rose from the ground with the sound of a high-speed electric drill, hissing geese, or of a welding torch. So this is something that pops up. I've heard snakes hissing, welding torch, hissing geese. That's the sound that these things make before they take off, or of an electric drill. The craft caused hair on his arms and head to stand up. So that's another telltale sign of a static electrical discharge, like permeating the whole localized area. That's exactly what other witnesses talk about as well. The man standing next to the craft was wearing a GI fatigues and had chevrons on his uniform. And then number 5 here, Laxon stated that he would recognize the man if he saw him in Oklahoma City tomorrow. That's how close he got to this gentleman. Let me move on to the next one here. This is Houston Post, April 10th, 1966. Laxon, who is familiar with aircraft, said he had no thoughts about the craft being from outer space or even from another country. It's an American piece of machinery, he said. It's nothing foreign. So here we have this expert witness. He's 100% convinced this is one of ours back in 1966.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, Trump has said we have things you don't even know about, that no one knows about. And this is probably getting into that realm. You know,
that's very possible. He's talked. Yeah. He's also mentioned that nobody has the equipment that we have. He's mentioned things like that. I think he's been given a bit of a briefing. I don't think he's been given the full story, but I think he's seen some things, and that's given him the confidence to talk about that.
Well, look at his uncle, John Trump. They acquired all of the Tesla information out of the New York hotel when Tesla passed away, and went all through MIT.
There's a Tesla component to the Trump family, absolutely. Daily Oklahoman, March 1st, 1971. It says, object sighting now rude. And you see on the upper right, that's a photograph of Eddie Laxon. So what it's talking about is that he got calls from 3 a.m. in the morning in London. There were people calling him. They were ridiculing him. And he regretted even talking about this. So what this does, this actually adds more credibility to his sighting here. And I want to go over what he stated here. What I saw was definitely not from space. The man was wearing fatigues and had a cap with the bill broken up like Air Force mechanics wear, Laxon said. It had common English letters on it. So again, this just reinforces his assessment that this was not ET, this is not extraterrestrial, this is absolutely one of ours. So then here's where we need to consider very carefully the tremendous implications about what that statement means. So if Eddie Laxon is right, and we had the technology in 1966 to build, design, field, and fly this craft, we really need to think about the implications of what all that means. Because if we already had the technology to travel into space without using liquid rockets as early as March of 1966, then what was the Saturn V rocket for? You know,
Hmm.
what was the Apollo space program all about?
Yeah.
Are we being had? Was it all a belated designer leak for something else? Have we all been played here? That's my question.
Yeah. That's a good question, too.
Like what was Apollo all about? Let me move on to the next thing here. Look at these Saturn V rocket engines here, liquid rocket engines. All the single point failures. You've got multiple single point failures. You've got these turbo pumps. You've got these valves. Any one of which goes off and you lose the rocket and potentially the astronauts. So
Yeah.
again, why do we need all this when we have something virtually with no moving parts
Yeah.
that can go exoatmospheric long before Apollo 11 landed on Tranquility Base on July 20th, 1969? Combined thrust 7.5 million pounds. Is all this necessary? This is the question I'm asking. If we already had the technology, is any of this necessary? Was Neil Armstrong briefed on this technology? Apparently not. So is NASA a smokescreen for the deep black defense contractor secret space program? That's the question I'm asking. Then we should ask, I just want to ask you, do you recall where you were on January 20th, 1986?
Yes, I do. And I remember seeing that.
I think most of us remember where we were. I know where I was. But
Mhm.
my question is, were the Challenger astronauts briefed on this technology?
Yeah.
And we know the results of what happened. Huh? We lost all 7 astronauts. What was Krista McAuliffe briefed on this technology? No, she wasn't. Was the commander briefed on this technology? No.
Yeah.
If they were told about this classified black budget aerospace technology, would they even have gotten in the space shuttle knowing the risks that they were getting involved in? I don't know if they would. That's my question. Bottom line is, we're running a defense contractor space program that is completely independent of congressional oversight, public scrutiny, paid for by deep black classified unacknowledged special access programs. That's what we're dealing with here. Now, I want to continue with our discussion here, and I want to talk about a potential ET craft. We highlighted probably my best man-made craft. So let's switch gears and look at a potential ET craft. Now, this is USS FDR, late 1958, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. They were on a shakedown cruise. The primary eyewitness is a man named Chester Krasinski. That's his name. And just to set this up, this is at night around 9:30 p.m. And there's all this commotion below decks. There's screaming, there's yelling, there's swearing. All these naval personnel are desperately trying to get up on the flight deck of this aircraft carrier. Now, when they finally got there, and I'm going to move on to the next drawing here. This is an original sketch. This is the report by Chester Krasinski. He said that when they got on deck, there were at least 25 other naval personnel. They saw this orange-white light approaching the USS FDR. Now, I want to mention, too, that the USS FDR had a history of UFO sightings. And the reason we believe that to be the case is that it had multiple UFO sightings associated with what we think to be the reason is the USS FDR was the first aircraft carrier to carry nuclear weapons on board. So it looks like it was monitoring our nuclear weapons. So when this light got close to the aircraft carrier, this was no light. This was about a 200-foot long cigar-shaped craft. Now, Chester Krasinski said that there was heat coming off this craft that they could feel on their faces. So now it's a CE1 case, it's a CE2 case. This is a 200-foot long cigar-shaped craft hovering about 150 feet above the flight deck, 9:30 p.m. Now, he also said that there were these rectangular windows on one side of the craft, and he could see with the other personnel standing on the flight deck looking at this thing what looked like humanoid beings going back and forth between these rectangular windows. Now, he used the term plural, so there was more than one. Now, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And this shows you a blow up of his original sketch. Now, he said that one of these beings raised its hand above his head and was waving back down to the naval personnel standing back on the flight deck. So this is now a CE1, it's a CE2 case, and it's a CE3 case. So I thought, we really need to do a full color rendering of what this may have looked like from the deck of the USS FDR. So I worked with my good friend Tom Bogan, and we came up with this illustration here that gives you an idea of what this may have looked like. So this is something that's historical. It's written in the logbooks of the FDR. Now, getting those logbooks will be nearly impossible. I want to do one more blow up here. And this gives you an idea of what Chester Grzinski and at least 25 other naval personnel saw from the deck of the USS FDR in late 1958, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Yeah. Pretty interesting stuff.
And, these cases, the configurations changed throughout the decades. If you look at the late 1940s, we had the disc-shaped craft. Going into the 1950s, we had cigar-shaped craft. If we go into the 80s, we've got the disc-shaped craft. We've got the triangular-shaped craft. And now all the rage are the flying platforms. So as the decades progress, the configuration of these vehicles change with the decades.
Yeah. I saw one on the PCH here about a year and a half ago. And it was cylindrical. I was on a motorcycle and I looked up and it was almost looked like it had a machined metallic, hammered, but very, very, defined. Yeah. And I just looked up and it wasn't very high either. I don't think that thing could have been more than 200 feet in the air, if even that. And I've seen so many craft in Santa Monica Bay. And of course, you and I spoke about how that base has been well identified off the coast, that huge cavern, out there north of Malibu. And there again is the craft that are in and out of our oceans, huge.
That's right. That's right. So, there appears to be two things going on here if we break it down. There's absolutely a man-made component to this. The defense contractors over at Air Force Plant 42 are responsible for building a significant percentage of these. I'm going to guess 85%, could be as high as 85%. However, there is a core of reality to this phenomenon that cannot be explained by man-made craft, because we can go back in time to the Foo Fighters in 1944 during World War II, where we had Allied B-17 pilots, B-24 Liberator pilots, B-29 pilots over the Pacific Theater. They reported these Foo Fighters, which were 3-foot diameter spheres that were red, yellow, orange in color, that would circle around the squadron and then peel away. This is back in 1944. If we go back to 1858, we've got golden colored flying trumpets hovering over the town of Oaxaca, Mexico, back in 1858 timeframe. We've got 1833. We've got square-shaped craft hovering over Niagara Falls for a half an hour with hundreds of people looking at this. This is back in 1833. So there weren't really any defense contractors building things at that time that I'm aware of. So there absolutely is a man-made component to this, and then there's a core of reality to this phenomenon.
Yeah. There's, I don't know if anybody's familiar, there's a freeway called the 8, which runs out of San Diego, California, over to the 10 just north of Tucson. And that parallels the 10 freeway, which more people are familiar with. And there's a trail, or I should say a highway, I think it's Highway 36, that cuts in between the 10 down to the 8 through Gila Bend. And if anybody remembers back in the old Westerns, there was something called the Butterfield Stagecoach Line. And that 36 is believed to run right on that. Well, I always take that shortcut. And probably about 15 years ago, I'm pulling a trailer and I'm going south to the 8. And I saw these huge, like almost Roman looking torches with flames coming out of the top. I'm by myself. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I had a flip phone then. That was before the smartphones came out, and then we got stupid, right? So what happened is I'm taking pictures of this, just going, I can't believe what I'm seeing. And the thing would move to the other side of the road because it's probably about 35 miles between, that trail down to the 8, maybe a little more. And it blew my mind. And I've seen so many craft out here in the Southwest, and some of them are fast. I mean, they like streak across the sky. There's just nothing we got that I know of that goes those kind of propagation speeds. There's just no way.
Well, when you factor in billions of dollars in classified, unacknowledged special access funding and what the defense contractors have been doing the last 7 decades, we're going to get something for our money for sure. But just to kind of proceed forward here, we've had congressional hearings last year. We've had congressional hearings this year. But when you really get down to it, the proof is in the physical hardware. The proof is in the UFO crash retrievals. That's how we're going to move this field forward. Just looking at CE1 cases and CE2 cases, that's really not going to move the ball forward. What we need at this time in 2025 is the physical hardware, the actual evidence. And the evidence is tied into the UFO crash retrieval cases. That is going to be the vehicle that facilitates disclosure. And that's why Leonard Stringfield is so important in this field, because he was the originator, the person who coined the term UFO crash retrieval. And his original paper that was presented back in 1978 at the MUFON Symposium in Dayton, Ohio, caused really an international sensation, because it was the first time that these firsthand military witnesses, they had a voice and they could tell their story, but the names had to be kept under wraps. But, just to review, it's these crash retrieval cases that contain the bodies, the debris, and the craft itself. That's how we're going to move this field forward.
Yeah. I was in Santa Monica Bay, probably, again, I would say close to 20 years ago. And I saw a craft up there just sitting, because, there's so much coming in on the flight paths to LAX. Santa Monica Bay is like, it almost could use a stop and go light. There's so many planes coming in and out. And I'm standing there, and this light didn't move, and I could see it wasn't stable. All of a sudden, telepathically, I started hearing they were scanning me, and I could literally hear them say, "Oh, he's mostly vegetarian. He's this, he's that," and it was pretty bizarre. And then once I dialed into that, it shot across the sky. So it was really wild. I've seen so much stuff in the Malibu, Santa Monica area over the years. It's quite interesting.
And what's interesting too, though, is that the United States government, they want to make anything prior to the USS Nimitz encounter completely non-existent. But I won't let that happen. Other UFO researchers around the world won't happen. We talked about 2 cases here. These historical cases will not go away. We will not let the government cover up these old historical cases. They're too significant. They won't go away. They can't be explained easily, and they need to be examined in great detail.
What's your opinion of Left at Eastgate? I thought that was so interesting, because all these military people had seen this craft come down. Right afterwards, what happens? All the nukes get taken out that weren't supposed to be there in the first place, and the cement trucks roll. And
so you're talking about Bentwaters?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, 1980. Well, what I would say about that is that, when you look at UFO cases, significant historical UFO cases, they never happen in isolation, because literally within a matter of 48 hours, We had the Cash Landrum incident on December 29th, 1980 in Huffman, Texas. So there's always these groupings of UFO sightings that are historically significant. There's like 2 or 3 grouped at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I got to say, I have to say, I've looked at the moon. In fact, I'm going to do this. I was mentioning this. I have a really good set of optical lenses that are long, like I can probably get a little over 1,000 millimeters with an 8K camera, and I can tell you what I've seen coming in and out of the moon. I mean, just the craft coming in and out of there it's astounding what's happening.
Now, there are alleged artificial structures on the moon that haven't been confirmed, officially. But if you look at some amateur astronomer sketches with the correct declination and right ascension, which I'm happy to provide to you, maybe you can confirm these. But he's got great sketches. I found these in the APRO files. But these are great sketches. They were published in the early 1980s in Fate magazine. We're talking about 40-mile-long levers on the moon that look like artificial structures. So there's more going on the moon than we know of, for sure.
Oh, you bet. Absolutely. Yeah. And, again, I recall, again, a long time ago, about 25 years ago, I was brought by a gold miner up to just north of Pahrump. Well, we know what's up there, right? Area 51. And I crawled up to the top of a hill, and it was quite a distance. I couldn't say the amount of miles, but I'd say a good 20, 25 miles away. And I watched these craft. They're not banking. They're just turning and coming down. So clearly there's a lot of activity going on up there that's unexplainable. And I think what you're talking about here might have a lot of answers to it.
Well, we know there's a man-made component to it. Yep.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Or a re-engineered, reversed engineered component.
That's very possible too. That's very possible too. Now that's harder to prove, but I don't deny it because there's just too many crash retrieval witnesses coming forward. These are reliable, firsthand military witnesses that held the bodies, that helped assist in loading these craft onto tractor trailers and shipping them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. When you look at the body of evidence that Leonard Stringfield put together, these witnesses aren't lying to us.
No, they're not. No, absolutely not. And, I remember my grandmother back in the early 90s, she was born in 1907, and she was telling me about orbs and balls that would come across the field. And, this is the early 1914, something like that. She said she was about 7 years old. And one of them went right through the house.
Yeah.
And interesting stuff. I've seen so many things in my own life. It's just inexplicable. So I think it's an amalgam of reverse engineered stuff, maybe engineered stuff, and paranormal phenomena that runs the gamut. A lot going on here.
When David Grush presented his testimony at the congressional hearings, he said that there is an ongoing UFO crash retrieval program. He said it himself in open congressional hearings. So, we have him to look at. So he's the one saying it,
Right. Yeah. I know. I had George Parks at the Tucson UFO, the MUFON, years ago had asked me to do an astrological study on abductions and various different phenomena. And I found a lot of accurate correlation, particularly on people who said they were abducted. And I had a great meeting. Camille introduced me to John Mack, Dr. John Mack. He was a psychiatrist who we met out in Malibu up in the mountains. He was a really cool guy. This is a long time ago. And he was talking about how he had examined so many people who had claimed to have been abducted. And, using psychiatry and all the modalities he could use, he said, these people aren't lying. He said, they're absolutely telling the truth, even if you don't believe what they say.
Correct.
And, Dr. Lear was another one who had removed implants. Of course, Dr. Lear's deceased now, but I really liked him. He was a nice guy. And, remote viewing groups I've worked with. I mean, it's unbelievable at how much paranormal phenomena is going on here. And a lot of it's inexplicable because Dr. Lear would take implants out of people, send them to laboratories, examine the metallurgy, and it was no possible way that we know of that we made it. Now, that could be in a black ops thing under the ground. I hear there's all kinds of stuff going on in underground bases, as I'm sure you know.
There's a lot of sinister, dark things going on. Yes.
Lots.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
You bet. So interesting stuff, all things to look at, you know. And again, I want to put your book back up. Tell people where they can get your book, because this is an excellent book.
My book is called Dark Files, A Pictorial History of Lost, Forgotten, and Obscure UFO Encounters. And it has 61 fully illustrated cases. I give you the dates, the locations, the references of where I got the information, so you can verify this on your own. Fully illustrated, and it's on Amazon right now. That's where you can get it.
Oh, excellent. Well, there you go. That's easy enough, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, excellent book. I've got it right here on my desk, and the graphics alone are worth the purchase. I mean, you did a great job on it.
Well, I can't take credit for all of it. I've had people all around the world help me, so it's a united coalition effort here.
Yeah, well, you did an elegant job at identifying things and also verifying all the information. So it's not just, you know, some arbitrary story. You've got a lot of data to back it up, which is amazing.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah. So, anyways, I have a lot of things I could go into on the astrology, but, you know, I think, you know, you've covered things very, very well. And, you know, the only thing I'll say is that I have had a lot of people who've claimed paranormal, ghost encounters, abductions, all these things. And I definitely find the matrix of this solar system is very, very interesting, how it seems to line up on the cycles. We've even noticed with remote viewers that there's certain phenomena that seems to increase their accuracy in targets versus other times that the targets aren't as accurate. So, and I notice individual cycles have a huge effect on that. Huge effect. So, yeah.
Well, you know, there's a spiritual component to this. It's not all man-made craft. There is something to be said for the other part of the research effort. Just quick example. When these beings were recovered and when the military tried to operate these craft, in a lot of cases, they could not operate the craft separate from the beings themselves, because there was a biocortex interface between the brainwave frequencies of the pilots and the craft themselves. So you could see that there was a component there. You could not separate the two. And I think that's one of the hurdles they had to overcome with, is getting that brainwave frequency hooked up to the craft itself. That's what they had to figure out.
Do you think that was an implant, or do you think that was actually a correlation to that being's brain?
Even long ago, there was talk about a headband that was discovered that could be used perhaps as some type of a interface with the craft itself. And I think they figured out how to reverse engineer that. That was one of the major hurdles, was getting the thoughts, the faster than light thoughts, linked up with the craft itself. Wow. It gets a little esoteric there, but I think that's something that, you know, it's not something where you pull a lever. Okay. They're way beyond that. This is something that's flown by thought. And I think that's one of the biggest hurdles they had to overcome.
Interesting stuff. Where was that at? Where did you hear that? Which bases were that?
Stringfield talks about that within the Stringfield literature. Yep. It's mentioned. There's a headband that's mentioned. Colonel Corso mentions a headband.
Oh yeah, Philip Corso.
He talks about that. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yep. So
that's way back. Lieutenant Philip Corso. He was, I think, the original Roswell craft disclosure on that. Wasn't
he talked about the technology trickle down that was allegedly brought into industry, and what he was in charge of at the Pentagon, where he had a file of all this technology that was farmed out to industry. And you know what? I think he deserves a second look. I think he deserves a second look. I think there's something to be said for that, gentleman. So I think he deserves a second look.
Yeah, boy, his name comes up a lot. For
It does.
years, his research has been absolutely fascinating, no doubt.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
I'm glad we could get together here, and
you
we've
bet.
covered a couple of historical cases. I mean, there's so much
Yes.
more we could talk about, but
Oh,
these
yeah.
are two of the most significant ones that I have in my personal collection.
Yeah. Well, you sure have done a great job, Michael, and I hope you continue to put out information for people that want to pursue this, because it's definitely a reality. And I think you're doing a great job at documentation, and I love the renderings you're doing. And it was a lot of fun. Like I said, you were standing next to me at the Hollywood Disclosure, and I thought, this is a nice guy. I said hi. Next thing I know, you grabbed the microphone and you're giving this incredible presentation, which was great. So
I mean, it's absolutely real, and
yeah,
we
it
paid
is.
for a major portion of it with our own tax dollars, so it's real.
Where the bankers did, I mean, that's a whole nother realm that I get
Mhm.
into a lot, is this mysterious funding of trillions upon trillions of dollars.
Of course.
Where's the collateral? Who is this?
That's a whole different
That's
PowerPoint
a whole
presentation.
nother world. Yeah, that's right. Now you're looking at the, Tower of Babel and the Great Taking and all these books that talk about this. And I think we're at a precipice right now of this change. And, it's very interesting how the celestial phenomena, which astrologers like to call astrology, I like to call it astronomy, because that's really what it is. It's a matrix. I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This is a soul matrix here of time and space that is just a one existence of dimensional reality. And we're all locked into it right here with the mind. And it's interesting how you bring up headbands and the interaction of these craft.
That's right.
The thought, the mind is really the frontier right now. And we see this, in the news and the media, and the shaping of humanity's perception of reality in so many areas of life. That's an area I love to focus on, is your conscious mind, because that reality structure is something that we always need to step back and look at from a much broader perspective. And I think the work you're doing allows people to see that from different viewpoints. So that's great.
I just want to make these cases come alive and preserve the history for everyone to see. That's all. That's the whole goal of this, is to make it come alive.
You bet. You bet. Well, thanks so much for joining me, and make sure we'll put your link up in the tags. And then, like I say, get his book. It's an excellent book. I really enjoy it. So thanks so much for coming on, Michael. I really appreciate it. And you'll take care. We'll see you soon. All right. So that was excellent. And again, that just really caught my eye when I saw his talk, which was very detailed and lengthy. So, yeah. So anyways, a lot of people are putting up some excellent comments about their encounters and things that have happened, and, so on and so forth. And somebody's just mentioning a quote here about, are the planets aligned for an encounter? Well, that's interesting, because I always look at astrology, or astronomy, if you will, as portals. And I really think there's so much more going on with the celestial phenomena that we call astrology, right? That is interacting with consciousness in so many unique ways. And I'd have to answer that question is yes, this Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's going to happen in February. Again, a lot of astrologers trumpet that they're sidereal astrologers, and it's the only one that's accurate. Well, I again have always noticed the tropical is accurate too. They both are. And one of the most, I think, unique phenomena that we have coming up this February is the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. Well, what does that mean? Well, Saturn is structure, reality, our perception of reality. It's also the prison of consciousness that we've all been exposed to and allowed to happen within our perception of conscious reality. And when Neptune joins that, what is Neptune? Neptune is the psychic portal to the upper dimensions. So, and if my analysis is correct, and other astrologers have said this too, this may not have happened for almost 26,000 years, where Saturn and Neptune have joined in the very first, what the Egyptians call bound of Aries. And it's not even just the bound is 5 degrees, but it's the first degree of tropical Aries. Now, the siderealists are going to look at that 24 degrees difference approximately, but it has not happened in this specific degree for that many thousands of years. And it'll never happen the same way twice, because whether you're a sidereal astrologer or a tropical astrologer, we've got what they call a precession. And this means that we're going around, it's believed, the central sun approximately every 25,900, 700 years. You could round it to 26,000 years. But that's absolutely phenomenal, because this has never happened in this degree for that many thousands of years. And what could it mean? Well, there we go. I mean, this is, are we aligned for more encounters, for our reality dissolving? Quite possibly. Quite possibly. That would be my determination, because Neptune is the portal out of this lower conscious reality into a much broader astral world, which is, I think, very likely to bring things we've not ever seen before in modern society, or at least what they've told us is modern society, right? If you're a Tartarian and so on and so forth. So this is really very, very powerful. And, there's also a big water trine that's coming up here too. 7 planets are going to be aligning in that water trine. And I have to say right now, see, we've got the next quarter of the moon happening, but that's also going to be happening on the 29th, which is the first quarter of the waxing moon, growing moon, right? And that's also the same day that Uranus conjoins Alcyon. And many of the ancients always attributed Alcyon to a very significant central star that we were believed to somehow have an axis going around. So, and again, that's been disputed by astronomers, but very fascinating how I've had clients tell me that they've gone into meditations and things. I think there was one individual that went down to Machu Picchu and did a meditation and said that everything was centered into Alcyon. Now, whether or not that's astronomically correct, we don't know, but we know that Alcyon is an exceedingly important fixed star, and it is the nature of Moon and Mars, which is very activating. And again, with Uranus, for the first time in 84 years, coming back to the second hit. It's already hit it once. The second hit is coming up right on the 29th. And of course, everyone's talking about the AI Atlas, so on and so forth. And they're saying that's when they're going to get a good look at this, comet coming around. Some people believe it's a craft. Some people believe it's a comet. The only thing I can tell you is many of the ancients would pay attention to comets, omens in the sky, and they would cast charts to see if they were positive or negative. And this one definitely seems to have a very serious intensity to it. I'll say that. So I don't think the world's going to end. Michael and I were talking before the show about, I told him about how I went in to the theater with a friend of mine in 1977 to watch the Late Great Planet Earth, which, if anyone's not familiar with that, that was a documentary that was narrated by Orson Welles. And ironically, I did it in a little town called Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is where Orson Welles was born. And when I watched the documentary, I was, I come out of the theater, well, we're not going to live past 1985, end of the world, So, and of course, let me pinch myself, that literally is almost 50 years from now. In fact, it will be in 1977, in 2027, that'll be 50 years since I saw that movie. And I can tell you we're still here. And that's why I always say, the world keeps going, creation keeps happening. There's something very divine here. And it was interesting how Michael had said some of these senators are saying, read your Bible. Well, there's all kinds of biblical references to extraterrestrial stuff. Also, there's things in the Vedas that say the same thing. So we are not alone. I never thought ever we were alone. And I think there's some very interesting thing. This planet is a phenomenal place of creation where I think spirit concretizes into matter. We talk about that a lot in those diagrams that I show, where literally the physical worlds is where you could say, garment of whatever genetic vessel you're in gets created in the womb of a mother, an egg, whatever you want to call it, right? And it gets imbued with spirit, animated. And what's so unique about us versus robots and AI, which are becoming more and more prevalent than we'd ever know. I'm hearing robots are now around in packing places for Amazon and different areas where we have very advanced robotics that are now becoming commonplace, and that's going to happen more and more and more. And they will infiltrate into our lives very soon. Won't be long. You're probably getting a robot to vacuum the floors, right? Wash the dishes or do whatever we got to do. So it's going to be like the Jetsons. And what's, I think, so important about that is us human beings in our consciousness. And that's something I always like to talk about, is the perception of reality of our lower conscious mind, because that is the most important thing in the universe by far. It's the most important thing in existence, because all of divinity and creation comes from the mind of divinity. And, it's very, very interesting stuff. So anyways, just FYI, got a lot going on here coming up here in November. I'm going to talk about that more. By the way, I'm going out of town just for a few days. I got to get some work done. And what I'm going to do is probably not have a regular podcast this Wednesday. So I might do a live on my phone or something if I can get the thing to work. And I dropped my phone. I got to get a new one. But anyways, I do want to point out, that again, on the 29th, this is going to be pretty important here, because the 29th is actually going to be this Wednesday. And I'll try and do some kind of a live, but if I can't, I can't. I may not be able to on that day. We'll see. But if not, for sure, I'll pick it up the following Sunday. And again, this is the day Uranus conjoins Halcyon. Well, what are we seeing in the world? I mean, a lot of stuff is going on right now. We're seeing all kinds of domestic things pop up, international things that are going on. A lot of, I think, forces are going on between good and evil. And the astrology shows that we've actually got some good things in the short term. We're going to have Mars make a trine to Jupiter and Saturn, and also Saturn and Jupiter trine. And of course, whether you're looking at tropical or sidereal, this is very powerful, because it will happen in a water trine in the sidereal. So very, very powerful energies that actually might tip the scales for a minute here in the positive direction. And then we've got that Uranus conjuncting Halcyon. So it's going to be a roller coaster ride. It's going to be a lot of fun. But that was a great show, and I really appreciate everyone joining me. I'll look at a few comments here, and then I've got to run here. But someone's mentioning here the show Ancient Aliens brings great evidence that we're not alone. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's so many great programs going on right now. Skinwalker Ranch, and again, Ancient Aliens. We've got the History Channel's putting out a lot of great stuff right now. And I would tell you that we're definitely going to say what someone's asking me, what theater in Kenosha? Yeah, it was actually on Roosevelt Road. I can't remember anymore. It might have been the Roosevelt Theater. I think it was. They were asking me where I saw the late great planet Earth. Who was it? A guy named Michael. What was his name? I can't remember. He owned a newspaper, and he'd come on to Jeff, you got to see this movie. It was the late great planet Earth, the documentary, right? And it was an interpretation of the quatrains from Nostradamus, of course. And many people have attempted to decipher the quatrains, which, if anyone's not familiar, that is Nostradamus's coded, they call them quatrains, on predictions of the future. And of course, Edgar Cayce had done the same thing. And a lot of people have said 2025 was a huge time of change, which would mirror what's going on in the astrology. I had mentioned earlier, not only do we have Uranus going over Halcyon, and by the way, it's going to do it a third time. When will it do that? Well, it's going to retrograde, which it's doing right now, and then it's going to go direct and come back and hit it again this spring. We'll be talking more about that. So this is the great game changer. I always look at Uranus as like taking a change grenade and throwing it in the room, and boom, everything. It's like that barrel of monkeys we shake up, right? You bang it on on the desk, and the monkeys fly, and you don't know where anything is until you assess it. And that can be the effect of Uranus. It brings great changes in society. Again, if I go back, the last time was World War II. Before that was the Civil War. Before that in the United States was the Revolutionary War. But if you look at the rest of the world and you leapfrog back every 84 to 86 years, you will find, even if Uranus wasn't discovered by us, which doesn't matter, right? That's the scenario. Like if the tree falls in the wood, was there a sound and no one heard it, right? Of course there was a sound. So Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto and other bodies have been there since the beginning of at least the arrangement of the solar system where it is, which God only knows when that was. But clearly, these phenomena show up throughout history. And again, I've been mentioning the next big one on the radar screen is the Saturn-Pluto square, which is going to come in 2028. Sounds like, oh, that's a long ways. Not really. We are almost into 2026. And these seem to line up, these major outer planet alignments and squares and oppositions really seem to line up throughout history with major, major changes. Again, 9/11 was the Saturn-Pluto opposition. COVID was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Did the world change on COVID? You bet it did. And it's still reeling from the effects. Look at the financial disaster that it caused. And I think, again, there are forces here that understand these alignments and the power of them. And for some odd reason, things seem to line up right when these things happen. So, it makes you kind of scratch your head and go, do billionaires just use astrology? Maybe the controllers do too. So it's and I know they do. So it's very interesting phenomena. And again, we've got a lot happening right now. And I not to get political here, but I thought this was kind of funny. I'm going to play this. I wasn't going to play it, but I think I will. And everybody's probably seen this, where the governor of Chicago was basically doing a 1984 mind control trick on us, in my opinion. And so I did a little cut here. Watch.
Of all the big cities.
Well, we are not in the top 30 in terms of our murder rate. Indeed,
That's no use. You're lying. How many fingers, please?
Our murder rate it has been cut in half over the last 4 years, and every year it's gone down by double digits. And if you look at all of the violent crime over the last 4 years,
here's a map.
They've all gone down.
U.S. cities, 17.47 per 100,000 population. Chicago is number 1 over Philadelphia, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Phoenix, Los Angeles, New York, and San Diego.
What I'm explaining to you is
you're
when
talking
you want
about
to fight
violent
crime.
crime.
Look, you can pull statistics up.
No, these are murders.
I'm explaining to you that our murder rate has been cut in half. And very importantly, Brett, and you got to hear this, very importantly, we've been doing the things that are necessary to bring crime down, right? We've invested in community violence interruption. We've invested in police.
Only the disciplined mind can see reality, Winston.
Sorry about that. I just had to do that. But I mean, really, when you examine some of the reality structures that are thrown at us, you can see how important your conscious reality structures are. And it's all about that. When you look at, I've been reading so much stuff about the infiltration of the education systems, et cetera, not just here, but all over the world. And, people are waking up. There's no doubt about it. And it's a shame that so much is hammered on the lower conscious mind of the youth. And we see this creating the dissension and division and violence. And it's really kind of interesting how that all works. And again, everything comes down to the mind, even with astrology. That's why I love when I do readings and I can help someone see that this begins here, ends here, or whatever it is, whether it's good or challenging. It allows us to do something called reaction, which is one of the most important things in the world. Even all this information about UFOs and UAPs and all this stuff, I think allows us to get information to restructure our reality structure or belief systems or reactionary systems that are much more healthy. And I think that's really an interesting thing. And I notice most people who've been exposed to a lot of different things, they are much more rooted in a reactionary reality that's more healthy. That's one way of putting it. Not always, but usually. And you can see it in certain people who've been around a lot of different phenomena and events and, viewpoints. They become much more, you could say stable at their reaction, because it's all about your mind. It's the most valuable thing in the universe. And your mind ain't the gray matter between these ears. It is the consciousness we take with us, the only thing we're going to take with us when we exit this life we call us, which really isn't us. So anyways, I'm so glad everybody joined me, and I thought this was a great show that Micheal brought, and a lot of great comments here. And you all take care, and I will see you next week. I'll try and do something on Wednesday. If I don't, I'll see you on Sunday, the following Sunday. So thanks so much, which will, I think, be November then, won't it? Yeah. So we're very close. So we'll talk to you soon. And again, thanks for joining me.